Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Pam. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am congested once again because my toddler has likely given me some sort of other illness,
She's
just a
licking
revolving,
doorknobs.
yeah, something like that, just a revolving door
Mm,
of
mm,
colds.
okay. Cool,
It's
cool,
okay.
cool.
I'm good though.
Yeah, good. Today we're going to be talking about what it means to be the default parent.
Yes.
Um, I think I'll start off with the definition of that and just kind of going in that direction. So, as I like to say, as per Google, the definition of the default parent is basically the primary giver who is first asked, needed, or assumed responsible for a child's physical, emotional, and logistical daily needs. Even in dual parent homes, this person carries the main mental load of family life without needing to be prompted.
hmm hmm
Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say I think it's important that we're having this episode because after our episode that aired about how your relationship changes with your spouse, we got a lot of feedback about the term we used called the default parent. And
Mm.
I found that this is not a very well known term.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people who don't really know or haven't heard of the term default parent, they take it
Mm-hmm.
offensively. Because they feel
Okay.
like the other parent is doing the majority of the work and the other one is maybe not doing enough. But that's not at all what it means, and I'm glad we're going over the
Right.
definition of it and clarifying what a
Mm-hmm.
default parent is. And it's not it just I want to reiterate that it's not that the parent that is not the default parent isn't doing their fair share. It's just that the default parent is the one who is more readily available and accessible to the child for their care and their needs. So, for example, I work from home. So if I were to send my child to school and she has to come home sick, I'm in the same town. I'm right there at the school. Like I'm the
Mm-hmm.
default person that the school is going to call to pick her up. And they're not going to call my husband, who's several towns away, because I am more accessible to pick her up. So that's kind
Right.
of what we mean by the default parent. Not in a resentful way. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yes. Of course. Well, thank you for clearing that up. We did get some of that feedback of like what it means to be the default parent and that kind of a thing. So it's good for us to clear that up and also just give the definition of it. Your mention of you being the person that gets called first, essentially, because you're right in town. As we were looking this up, I kind of ran into some of it like at some point we put ourselves in being the default parent because while it is valid that you are the one that's closer, um, it may be that like maybe you listed yourself first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and because you're like, well, I'm the one that works from home, so like I'm gonna be the one that's able to pick up my child. Um, but I do want to dive a little bit I want to dive a little bit into the topic of like how sometimes being a stay-at-home parent or a stay-at-home working parent puts you in the role of being the default parent because you're the one that's there, let's say 9 times out of 10. So if they get hurt, if they're hungry, when it's time for a nap, when it's time for bed, if you're solo parenting often, that kind of turns into just being who they see more. And so to them, they when they're hungry or they want something, they automatically choose the default parent. I think it's important to kind of express that because, again, we did use that phrase in the last episode, and it's not meant to be offensive. It's just by default, that's the parent they go to. I don't think it's especially at like our kids are about the same age. At this young age, they don't recognize having a favorite. They don't recognize like they just see like, oh, okay, like this is the parent, so that's the one I'm going to. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can even give you the example that I had my niece and nephew were here, and they call me Titi. And every time they went to ask me something, they're 6 and 8 or 6 and 9, and every time they went to ask me something, they say, Titi Pam, Titi Pam. And my son was like, Titi, and I was like, no, baby, I'm mommy. But do you see like the connection in their brain? They're like, oh, she must change her name, like she must be Titi now. But no, I am mommy. But I use that as the example because that is very much the example of being the default parent, or essentially how that comes up for kids, because you're the one they see most. You know, sometimes depending on the schedule, there might be one parent that's able to take said child to the doctor more often. Like they go to the pediatrician because let's say your partner works at night, you work during you work during bedtime, let's say, and your partner is with them during the day while you sleep. You're the one that's able to take them to the doctor, or they're the one that's able to take them to the doctor, take them to appointments, take them to the little gym, take them to things like that. So by default, they just see you more. There's just a different thing, you know?
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. And maybe the word default we can tweak a little bit as a society. Maybe it could just be, the available parent. I don't know how else to make it sound a little bit nicer when it rolls off the tongue, But, there's also this other implication that's put on the default parent, that they are the ones that have the heavier mental load to keep the family running and the household running. So while perhaps the other parent does the majority of tasks, like who drops them off at daycare, who handles bedtime and bath time, who makes doctor's appointments, maybe the other parent does all those things, but when the default parent has to do something like, okay, well, I know where all of their sized up clothes are going to go. I'm going to sort their closet, and I'm going to make sure they have room and clothes ready for when they have their inevitable growth spurt in about 2 weeks. They're the ones planning ahead and having that laundry list of things to set them up and set the household up for success. So there's that laundry list of things that is just revolving around in your head constantly, and it's being very proactive. I think the default parent has to be very proactive, and being proactive.
Invisible labor.
Right. Yes. The invisible labor is really the key to making sure that your household is running smoothly instead of running in a reactive way.
It's interesting that we both, in just, mentioning what like the definition of a default parent is and using the examples and things like that, our first things that we're using to kind of describe it is that we're talking about appointments. We're talking about like being picked up and like necessities, things that are done all the time regardless of who is doing them. Essentially, like baby naps. Baby has to go to the doctor. Baby has to go to bed. Baby takes a bath. Like those types of things. But one of the things that comes with the mental load is also meal planning. There's food in there. There's always something to be done. And they're common responsibilities. They're things that are essentially we do all the time, like breathing and brushing our teeth. But for some reason, our first like line of defense of like the description of a default parent is that we focus on like necessities, as if those things are the things that are more common, and forgetting the like basic necessities too that are still the same. Yeah,
and I think about like some of the things I think about that you don't really think is like a default parent thing is packing a diaper bag and anticipating the needs of what your child is gonna.
That anticipation.
It's the anticipation. It's like, okay, so if I'm going to a restaurant, then I need to pack some extra toys, and these toys need to be kind of small so I can fit them in one diaper bag because I'm going to this restaurant by myself, which means that I only have hands to carry my child and a diaper bag and nothing else. So it's like it's like that revolving, okay, well this, then this, but if I do this, then that, and then if I,
Oh
it's
my
like
gosh.
preparing.
And it's like a circle.
And it's like you really have to, and it's just like, well, okay, but like what? And then it's all the what ifs. Okay, but like what if they pee through their diaper? I need to have an extra change of clothes. But then what if it's too cold out because the temperature is weird? Or what if it starts raining and they get wet? And what if, and you're only on the clothes that you're putting in the diaper bag, let alone the food, like you mentioned. Okay, well, we're going to a restaurant, but now I have to look at the menu to make sure that there's something that they can eat. And if there's nothing that they can eat on that menu, then I need to bring some food for them,
I need to figure that out. I need to be able to make sure that they have food. So it's like it almost sounds like a spiral.
Yeah.
Like it's like a mental spiral, but it is in anticipation. And I'm sure that it is, I recognize that it is it's something that happens in a two-parent household. It's something that happens on either end. If you are the parent that's a stay-at-home parent and the other parent is the breadwinner, the breadwinner is constantly like, I can't be late to work because if I'm late to work, they're going to notice me. They're going to put the eye on me. I'm going to get in trouble. I could get fired. I could lose my job. So there is a different amount of that load that happens.
Yeah. And they could be considered the default breadwinner.
Right. Because
so
there's also that.
They're anticipating too. Right? They're anticipating the needs to make sure that they are providing for the family as the breadwinner of the family. So yes, they are the default breadwinner and they do have to anticipate the needs of their job to ensure that they bring in the money that is necessary to sustain their family. So I guess like the same term can be applied to parenting. Okay, the default parent needs to anticipate the needs and take on the invisible labor and the mental load to ensure that their child is well taken care of. Yeah. And their needs are met.
Right. And I think it's, again, in a dual parent household, there is this constant defaultness, whether it is default parent in like what we've been talking about with the needs and the appointments and the food and the regular routines, and then the default parent who could be seen as the default breadwinner, who is, again, making sure I need to make sure that I can do XYZ so that this happens, and those needs are met. And there is a constant, like, I like to say like a double circle, if you can imagine, like the screws that spin into each other and like they keep like spinning, and that's how one moving pushes the other one, and that's
the gear.
Like, yes, that's what it's called, the gear. Sorry for the long explanation, but
it is 9:46 p.m.
when we're recording this.
Parenting.
We're actually kind of lucky that we're not slurring, to be honest.
Truly.
But yeah, so like it's like that gear, and one thing is helping the other kind of keep going. So like, but for some reason, the default parent is the one that gets highlighted, because almost like, I know that it's not the case, but it's almost like, well, yeah, but like the default breadwinner, or maybe it's that you both work, but one of you makes more money than the other. So like, somehow the default parent still gets highlighted a little bit more, or there is more, almost like it's the more important side. And I think they're both important. I think they're both very relevant, so to speak.
Yeah, they're, like you said, they're necessary for each other to make the machine that is the household go round and round and round.
Yep.
Yes.
I did want to note out some like common responsibilities in addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, as far as like sometimes the default parent is the one that gets up in the middle of the night when like the child's not feeling well, or the child is waking up during emotional meltdowns, the one who does the pickup and drop off of after school activities if your kid is old enough for that. The one that packs the lunches, shops for the clothes, and preps the meals. And I know that, like, on social media, there is the joke that, like, oh, my husband doesn't know the pediatrician's name.
Yeah,
Or,
there's this trend here where it's like, oh, well, ask your parent or ask the non-default parent if they know their kid's diaper size, or if they know,
Yep.
do they know their kids, like when was their first haircut, like what's their favorite toy, what's their, favorite this or this or that, what is their, like, did they meet this developmental milestone, and it's
Yep.
like they have to quiz the parent that's not the default parent. And I don't think that's appropriate personally. It's another one of those trends that I think is a little bit, I don't know.
divisive. It's
Yeah.
divisive.
Yeah, definitely. And I just, and a lot of the times it's unfortunately pinned on the fathers, because a lot of the time, the default parent is typically viewed as the mother. And that's not always the case. I mean, we have to
Right.
acknowledge the fact that there are two father parents, there are two mother parents, there are
Yeah.
hetero, male, female parents out there, that doesn't
Active
mean,
grandparents even
Exactly.
in children's lives. So, like, it really does
Exactly.
vary.
So I think it also, like, pinning the default parent on solely the mother figure is, I think, really detrimental to parenting and in general, and the village mentality in general, because it's continuing to pit people against each other in a very vulnerable space in their life. And I think, there's a lot of defensiveness when a parent who is not deemed as a default parent, there's a lot of defensiveness because they feel like it's an attack on them, that they don't know these things, or that they're
Like,
not
they're not a good enough parent kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I don't know the diaper size. I don't really change the diapers because I'm not home to change the diapers, and I don't
Right.
buy the diapers because I'm not home to shop for the diapers. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite fair for the people who are not deemed as the default parent, some of these trends that are going on.
Yeah, I personally really like to see the ones that, like, dial that back, and they're like, no, he doesn't know the diaper size, and no, my partner doesn't know the diaper size, my partner doesn't know when the next appointment is, my partner doesn't know when the next kid's birthday party is, or is even concerned with the present that kid is getting. But the lights are on, there's food in the fridge,
They know exactly how to roughhouse with them in the way that it makes them laugh for ages and ages and ages. They know how to read that book the way that they like it.
They know to do the voices. They know to be more animated when they're going through a tantrum, and they just need to be snapped out of it and redirected, and they know how to do those things. So it's like, is it important to have diapers and the right sizes and those kinds of things? Of course it is. But it is also just as emotionally important for children to have a present parent, a parent where this matters, because I don't know about you, but when I think about my childhood, I don't think about which one of my parents was at my doctor's appointment with me, or which one of my parents was XYZ. I think of, like, which one of my parents was present, which, like, who was there for what, you know what I mean? So, like, I think that's just as much as important to say that, like, just because you're not the conventional default parent does not mean that you're not just as important.
Absolutely. But,
Now,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I'm good.
I did want to kind of, like, swing the conversation towards, Sarah kind of brought this to my attention, and it is to talk about the default parent syndrome. Could you kind of give us a little info about that, or kind of guide us in that direction?
Yes. So the default parent term started to become very popular a few years ago. And again, it's really talking about the invisible labor, mental load, physical availability you have in your household for your children. That said, it's very taxing to be that person all the time. You know, having to be on constant alert and constantly be anticipating needs and planning 14 steps ahead, you know, is takes a toll on you, especially if you are also a working parent or if you have no support as a stay-at-home parent. So there's something that researchers are starting to dive into a little bit, and they're calling it the default parent syndrome. And I am going to list off some symptoms. And it's very interesting because a lot of them coincide with what you noticed in postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, things like that. So a lot of it is surrounded around feelings of hopelessness, feeling like you have made a mistake, feeling detached from your partner and or loved ones and children, feeling a lack of desire sexually and intimately. That's just to name a few. And so a lot of these symptoms and ways of expressions of default parent syndrome are really related to a lot of the postpartum things we see in mothers. Now, it's very interesting because there's a lot of fun being made that the non-birthing parent can also experience postpartum depression, anxiety, whatever. You know, they can be pathologized to you know, have the sympathy symptoms. But is it that they are perhaps the default parent and are experiencing default parent syndrome instead? So it becomes a little bit nuanced and complicated when you think about it that way, because not all birthing parents are the default parent. That's something really important to emphasize there. Like sometimes the non-birthing parent is the one that is taking on the mental load and the invisible labor. So that's kind of it's in its early stages, its infancy of, you know, research and all of that. But yeah, a new term called the default parent syndrome is starting to be questioned a little bit. And I think it's important. I think that's really important work. And I think it also highlights the role of non-birthing parents and parents who, you know, may not be the default parent, but also are experiencing the hardships of parenthood and what that entails too.
Right. You know, it's very interesting. I had never heard of the syndrome. I had heard of being a default parent, but I had never heard of the syndrome. And it's one of my favorite things about this day and age is the way that we're able to look at the last 30 to 40 to even 50 years of a lot of things and see the way we've developed as a society, we've developed as a people. And obviously, since becoming a mother, you know, the topics that apply to us really like have me turn my head and be kind of surprised or shocked, because when I hear of, you know, typically like we mentioned before, the default parent is the mom, let's say, or the birthing parent. Because it's not always the case, that has changed really in the last 15 to 20 years of it not always being the case that it's the birthing parent. And so to note that the psychology behind it, very specifically the mental load of being the default parent and default parent syndrome, to know that that's being looked at, to know that that's being observed, to know that it's just being studied. I hope that more people can talk about it, you know, because as we were looking up this episode, you know, I realized that a lot of this is linked to, like you said, the postpartum depression symptoms. There's like anxieties and resentments and things like that show up for this. And I'm like hoping that they continue it and like almost like push it along so that it like can be studied more and just recognized more, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really essential to be recognized more because it's validating for parents who are feeling these things but don't have a name for it. I'm sure there are plenty of parents out there that are technically the default parent and don't even know it, but are feeling all of these things and feeling the weight of that and telling themselves that maybe they can't handle it because they're the non-birthing parent, or maybe they are the birthing parent, but they don't want to label themselves with, any of the well-known things like postpartum depression, anxiety, or whatever, because maybe they've got a 5-year-old and they're feeling this way, or an 18-year-old and they're feeling this way.
Right.
And that also, again, like begs the question, well, when does postpartum end, or does it?
Right.
All of it is kind of related, but I think the more we talk about it and the more research that goes into it, the more validated people will feel. And I feel like the more people will start to share their own feelings and experiences and maybe help fewer people feel in the dark about it or shame about it.
Oh, for sure. So I think I hope that in the way, and I still we have a long way to go, and we know that this is a whole other episode. In the same way, though, that we've started bringing it up more about postpartum depression, I hope that we talk more openly with our partners. If you're feeling like you're the default parent, or you're feeling maybe the opposite, maybe that's giving you some kind of anxiety or resentment, or even just maybe feeling less than, talk openly with your partner. Bring it up. Just say, look, like, I feel overwhelmed, or, hey, I noticed you were being overwhelmed. Instead of it being just, hey, I appreciate you. Thanks for doing things. Sometimes in appreciating, it's balancing some of that and just talking openly, with your partner.
I think that's a big piece of it too. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that I think a lot of parents who coin themselves as the default parent feel very underappreciated for all that they do because of the invisible tasks that are done and are kind of, assumed to be done by this person all the time. I think that builds resentment really quickly, and it's easy to let that fester and build up, and, it's tough. Parenting is the hardest thing, one of the hardest things you can do in the world. And I think when you are the default parent, it becomes even more difficult because you have this, not just desire, but you have this job to do. It's like a second job to make sure that everything is okay and everything is going to be okay. And all the what ifs are set up for, and all of that. So, I mean, there's a lot on a default parent's plate, but at the same time, I think learning how to communicate and delegate some of that work, some of those,
sharing the tasks,
sharing the loads, is really important. And I'll be the first one to admit that I just assume that I'm responsible for certain things because I just don't want to have to teach how to do this or how to do that.
It costs me more to explain than it does to do it myself, kind of thing.
Exactly. So it's like, I mean, I will hold myself accountable for assuming a lot of those tasks just because I don't want to be the one to delegate and teach the tasks. But that's how a default parent role is perpetuated at the same time. So maybe we should challenge some of the people who identify as default parents to take that extra step, because hopefully you only have to take it one time if you delegate some of the work to somebody else and teach them teach them the bedtime routine, teach them how to pack the diaper bag, teach them how to make the formula or how much breast milk is needed in the bottle and what have you, how long you're going to put the bottle in the warmer for. It's all these little tiny things that the default parent knows and does. Teach it.
Right.
Or narrate it while you're doing it in front of the other parent.
I want to go a little bit deeper in saying that sometimes maybe you can't delegate a task, right? Like in this case, we can talk about if you're the breastfeeding parent,
Absolutely.
you can't delegate that if the other parent is not able to breastfeed, right?
Correct.
So maybe the delegating task is, you can't help me here, but while I am doing that, maybe you can reset the kitchen. Maybe you can get us set up for tomorrow morning, while I'm handling bedtime and the nursing. Maybe you can set up the kitchen. Maybe you can set up even if it's just the coffee maker, like something as simple as that. If you drink coffee, is to say like, I can't do what they do, but I can do XYZ to make this easier for them. Because ultimately you're in a partnership.
Absolutely.
That is the ultimate goal, is for you guys to succeed as a unit. So in delegating those things, it comes back to talking openly with your partner, and you do have to release it. You do have to take a step back and say, if you like something a certain way, I think it's important to express that and etc. But like, don't expect, if you're type A, don't expect your type B or C partner to do things the way that you do them. So you have to release that. You have to, not for any other reason other than it's good for you. This is how we balance this. So it's good to release that and to help your partner help you. In that sense.
Absolutely. I could not have said that better, Pam, honestly. I couldn't, because I am the type A parent that took on all of the mental load of things because I wanted to make sure that things were done as perfectly as possible.
A certain way.
Let me tell you, perfect does not exist, especially when you are in survival mode, because that's what you're in the early parenthood days. You're surviving. You're surviving, okay? And I know that's hard for people like me who are type A, who are perfectionists, who maybe have, some mental illness in there, gearing towards anxiety and OCD to hear. But as a survivor of those things, I will let you know that Pam's words are tried and true.
And they're also tried and true because Pam has some of those tendencies that Sarah just described, where no one's going to clean my kitchen the way I clean my kitchen. And that's just that. That's just, and you know what? To take it even back a couple notches, no one's going to cook the food the way that I cook it or the way that I like it. So I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to, and they're just, these sound like very, it's easier said than done to have a conversation with your partner when you're feeling overwhelmed, because you don't normally bring a conversation like this up when you're well, yes, in a gentle way, and you also don't bring it up when you're in a happy-go-lucky state. It's usually when you're like on the ledge, when you're like, just burn it all down. I'm exhausted. I'm in survival mode. I'm hardly functioning. I have no sleep, or etc. So it's
why
harder.
Is the sink full? I don't understand.
I don't understand. I'm doing all these other things. Why is the sink full? And it's like, the goal here is, yes, for an empty sink, but for everyone to be happy, safe, and
Healthy.
taken care of. Right. Healthy, taken care of. So the dishes are a minute part of that. So instead of the lash out, and letting that resentment, because that's what that is, there's a resentment that's attached to that. Instead of allowing for it to overtake, it's important to check in with your partner, have that open dialogue about it. And you know what I've noted, like for myself, even this goes, yes, with my partner in parenting, but just in my life in general, sometimes people don't realize that you have all these things on your list. And so you're functioning through the world with, I got to do this, I got to do that, and I got to consider this, and I got to consider that. And you're doing all these things, and you could just ask someone, you could delegate, so to speak, and just be like, okay, well, I don't need to do that. I could delegate that to that person and delegate this to this person. And instead of having this ever running to-do list, and if you
Mental
have that
to-do
open-
list. Mental to-do list. Because
Yeah.
remember, no one can read your mind. So although your
Correct.
mind is racing through this ever ending to-do list, no one else sees that unless you communicate it.
Right. And if you're not communicating it and you're internalizing it, and then you have this resentment, it's just endless. And it becomes this full, like, invisible load. You're burnt out, you're even more anxious, you're overwhelmed, you're in a stage of your parenthood that you're not able to enjoy because we're not communicating or delegating or both.
Now, it's important to acknowledge that sometimes delegation is not possible, like you were mentioning earlier. Like sometimes, I'll give you an example. Like my parents worked opposite shifts. So my mom worked during the day or the nights, and my dad's worked during the days. So they were solo parenting all the time.
Good time.
All the time. So they couldn't delegate the tasks. But at the same time, they were really, really good at communicating when they were frustrated. And not at each other, just in general. They
Just
would
at
always,
things.
you know, when their shifts would overlap they would be home for dinner for 1 hour. And that's when they would talk about, well, I needed to pick up Sarah from school today because she wasn't feeling good. But then like that meant I had to drop her home and then take her with me to pick up her brother because I can't leave her alone. And I didn't get any sleep. So I'm going to be tired at work today. And, but they were really good at communicating what was going on in their day that was tough. And even if the other partner couldn't help them in that moment, they were at least there to listen and take on, well, okay, well, get some rest now. I'll handle dinner. Get ready, decompress, and we'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow's a new day. So that's just how my household worked when I was growing up. It's just a small example, but it's tough when you don't have the village to delegate to, and when you are inevitably the default parent because you have to be. That's not a choice; you have to be. But we're hoping that we're building this online village for you to, come to us if you need a little vent session, because sometimes that goes a long way too.
Yeah, sometimes maybe you're just looking for a way to communicate to your partner that you're overwhelmed, and like you want someone that maybe doesn't know you well, or you want just someone that's unbiased and not in your situation to help you kind of navigate it differently. Our DMs are definitely open for that. They're open for us to just have the conversation of like, you want to have a vent session? Great. You want advice, or I guess an outlook in a different direction? Our DMs are open for that because we all need a village. So this is kind of why we're here.
100%.
So I think that kind of wraps up this episode. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.